story of learning to be faithful to God and following Jesus, our story of discipleship. What are the key things when it comes to understanding and making sense of a text? What are the things we need to know?
Context.
We call them out.
Context and genre.
Context and genre, there we go. Yes, context determines the meaning. It's all the things that surround the text that help us understand what this language means, what these words mean, what the first reader would have understood. And genre determines the appropriate response. So genre is the type of writing that it is. So we respond differently to a newsletter, to what we do to a news article, to an encyclopedia, to a fairy tale, to a poem, that sort of thing. Gospel is a specific genre, and it's not biography, but it includes biography. It's not just history, but it includes history. It's a wonderful mix of all these things that are put together to tell, to make a particular point. It was a genre that was first used in the Roman Empire, and Mark is the first person to take it out of that context, put it into writing, and use it to tell the story of Jesus Christ. Very much as the Roman Empire was going around saying, this is the gospel of Caesar, Mark was writing a story saying, no, let me tell you the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. Everything that Mark wanted us to know was included. He left nothing for Matthew or Luke or John to say that they had to say. He included the whole story of the gospel. And but he was being as concise and to the point as he could, and so never put in any detail that wasn't important. Every piece of detail in the story is important to us understanding what he's saying. And so the key question is always, what does it mean? We're not asking, did it happen like that? We're not asking what the history was or that sort of thing or the science behind it. What we want to know is, what does it mean? What does it teach us about being a disciple? What does it teach us about following Jesus? What does it teach us about God? All of it happens in the first century near Middle East. Honor and shame are the background to almost everything that happens. It is the big currency of the culture, if you like. And that's where we're going to start. So shall we jump right in? If you can't hear me, you need to tell me. I'm going to jump right in. I can't see anyone at the moment, but I'm going to read and then we can talk after that. The usual questions, though, as I read it to you, ask yourself, what does it sound like Mark is saying? Where is the detail in the story? Where's the repetition? If you've heard the story before, what do you notice for the first time? What have you taken for granted before that maybe is not in the text? What's unusual? What's strange? It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard, and she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on Jesus' head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the woman given to the poor. The money given to the poor. And they scolded her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray Jesus to them. And when they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus. What do you see? What do you hear? What sounds unusual? What seems strange? I see this, Helen's just asked in the chat, and Malcolm's answered it correctly, that the text is the NRSV. Probably more than 95% of what I have shown you and read to you is from the NRSV. There have been odd occasions where, particularly if you remember early on, there were a few contentious translations, and I pointed those out to you, but most of it's been straight from the NRSV. Yeah. What do you see in the text? What's struck you as strange? What's been unusual? You've heard the story before, haven't you?
So it's 2 days before the festival. Is the festival therefore on the Saturday, as far from a Jewish point of view, or is it another day?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
I mean, would this be perhaps the Thursday then, or would it be the Wednesday, or is it?
I honestly couldn't tell you.
Well,
I really don't know yet. Why does it matter?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, it's something I've read before, but I just wondered what day that particular festival was on, as far as the Jews was concerned. Because they've obviously used Friday and the Sunday quite purposely in the Christian church.
But the Passover,
Well, the Friday and the Sunday were used purposely in the Christian church because of their correspondence with Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And so every Sunday celebration is kind of a mini Easter celebration here.
but the Passover will depend what year they're in as to which day of the week it actually lands on. And it just happens to be noted to us that Passover is around the time of the Sabbath on this particular year. But it depends what year that actually was. Could have been other years. You could have Passover on a Tuesday.
Okay.
In the good news,
So we don't know for sure.
in the Good News Bible that I've got, it says it's now Wednesday.
Okay. All right. So the assumption that the Passover was going to happen on Friday. I don't think it's particularly important to Mark, but he does make the point that it was 2 days, 2 days prior. So this is the big lead into what is happening. And yes, we're in Holy Week as we would understand it as Christians.
One thing which strikes me is that the chief priests and the scribes are basically not wanting to do anything during the festival. That's quite a wide window. That's 8 days, as I understand it. It's Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah.
So they're keeping their fingers crossed that Jesus doesn't lead an insurrection actually during the Passover, but they're absolutely terrified of the following that he has and the place he has in the people's hearts.
Yeah, I think that's very clear that there's the sense of they know that he's got a place in the common person's hearts. Yeah.
Jesus is in the home of a leper. We assume
Before you go there, Sharon.
Yeah.
Just let's look quickly at verse 1 because it tells us something else about the scribes and the chief priests.
Oh yeah, sure.
What do we see there?
They were scheming to arrest Jesus and kill him.
They were scheming to arrest Jesus. They're looking. There's no talk of a fair trial here or anything. They're looking for a way to arrest Jesus. Not just that, to arrest him by stealth. Not just that, to arrest him by stealth and kill him. I mean, the outcome is decided in their minds. They're just waiting for the opportunity. Yeah.
But we tend to be very negative about the chief priests and the scribes, but aren't they trying to prevent the loss of life if an insurrection arose when there's half a legion sitting in the middle of Jerusalem and the Romans would have just simply wiped them out? So they're worrying about the people, not just their own necks. They're worrying about the safety of the people of Jerusalem, because they don't accept Jesus as a man from God. They don't accept him as the Messiah. So he's a false Messiah that could lead the people into a lot of trouble.
So, Jim, I'd agree with you to some extent, but in chapter 3, there was the discussion about, well, is he a false Messiah or not? And the people came and they accused him of working for the devil. And Jesus' response was to say, well, if you say I'm working for the devil, tell me, see, these are not the words, but you can go and look at the story. Look at the things that I'm doing, because you can't argue that the things that I'm doing are good. They clearly are good. And if they're good things, I can't be working for the devil. So if after that you choose to say, you choose to plot to kill this man, then you're fighting on the wrong side. Then you're working against what he's doing.
I don't think the chief priests and lawyers were bothered about the Romans. I think they were bothered about themselves and the fact that if Jesus was so popular, what was he going to do to their situation and their position?
I would agree to some extent, but I think the argument could be made that if there was certainly if there was a riot and in insurrection in the Romans would have clamped down on it harshly. That's what they did. Yeah.
Adrian, can you comment on chief priests, as in the plural? If it had been priests and the scribes and the chief priest, as in a singular, we hear of Caiaphas, we hear of Annas. Was it usual for the previous high priest to still have influence?
Sorry, I don't know. Mark is just handling them as a sort of a
Collective.
class of people, a group of people, a collective. Yeah.
Okay.
Thing I wouldn't know. Shall we go on? So he goes to he's at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. What's happening? What do we hear? What's Mark saying in this part of the story?
It says he's reclining. That implies a meal, but he doesn't actually mention a meal. He's resting.
Would you be surprised if he was having a meal?
We just say while he was Jesus was eating.
Yeah, different translation. So there is the implication that he's reclining, sitting at the table because he's eating. It's no surprise to find Jesus in the house of a leper or having a meal. We've journeyed with him. We know this is the kind of stuff Jesus does. This is partly what the chief priests and scribes don't like about him. So there's no surprise there. In fact, it goes a step further prior to that. It says he was at Bethany. Now, Bethany is a little town just outside Jerusalem, a couple of miles, decent distance, but Bethany actually means the house of the poor. So as much as it's a place, it also, if you read it, it should bring to mind while Jesus was in the house of the poor, in the house of Simon the leper. Again, there's no surprises there. It's just a little reminder in the story of the kind of person Jesus was and what he did and where he hung out and what some of the other people didn't like about him. Yeah? Come on, go on. What else?
It was the reaction of the people present at the appearance of this woman, wasn't it? That this woman came in and poured her oil over Jesus' head, and their reaction was not at the fact that the woman had come in, but that she'd wasted the oil.
Yeah.
In other Gospels, the description of the woman is quite extensive. a sinner, a woman of the city. But here it is not, it's just the woman. But the description of the alabaster jar is quite detailed.
Yeah, that's interesting, huh?
Yeah. Just notice that.
So why gospel writing, eh? Why might there not be much of a description of the woman? Or if I can ask the question differently, what do you know about the woman? Because we don't know her name. That's not unusual. We don't know her name. We don't know much about her. What could we honestly infer from what Mark has specifically told us in these verses in chapter 14?
That Jesus meant a great deal to this woman, whoever she was, wherever she'd come from. He was so important to her that she wanted to do something for him.
And why do you think that was?
Well, the suspicion is that, and it is a suspicion, that he had done something for her previously.
Okay, but Mark doesn't tell us that,
No.
Whereas Mark does give us an indication in the story of something else.
The fact,
What else do we know about? Yeah.
the fact that she's brought in something very expensive could indicate that she was a woman of means.
It almost certainly means she's a woman of means. Someone who didn't have serious means would not have 300 years worth of wages of ointment to pour over someone's head. Yeah, absolutely. Must be a woman of considerable means. Why would she pour the ointment over his head? What might that mean?
Oh, isn't it a form of anointing, pouring oil over somebody's head when they come to your home for a meal?
Or is it something to do with
That the
kingship?
feet are washed and the head's anointed with oil.
Yeah. So all of that, and Ian rightly says it was something to do with kingship. It was perhaps something to do with recognizing someone as being a prophet or royalty or something like that. So there's a sense in which this woman coming in and doing this is anointing Jesus as king, if you like, as prophet, if you like, and at the same time, there were those words, and preparing his body beforehand, verse 8, and preparing his body beforehand for its burial. So if we hold all of those things in tension with each other, kingship and prophet and accepting that he's going to die, she kind of, can I say she gets it? She understands who Jesus is. She's not making arguments for a white horse, son of David, Messiah. She's saying, this is the suffering servant, son of man, who is going to be handed over to the authorities and crucified and be killed. How many people through the story have we met that have actually got it so far? I mean, apart from Jesus. She might be the first one, am I right? Really explicitly?
Is this not a type of overwhelming love? It's a pattern of what Jesus is going to do. It's also a pattern perhaps for all of us who follow.
Absolutely, David. Yes. Yeah. It's a type, a type of discipleship, not a kind of discipleship, but a type of discipleship. This is what discipleship looks like. This is what it's about. This is, I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is proclaimed, this will be told in remembrance because she gets it, because she understands who Jesus is. And she's prepared to offer what she has, 1 year's worth of perfume to anoint his body, to show those other people who are around there that this is the king, this is the prophet, this is the one who despite the fact that he's going to die, is the king and the prophet and, you know what, Son of God. Yeah. What else do you see or hear?
Judas Iscariot,
Yeah.
who clearly is disappointed in Jesus in some way. And I think Judas is one of the ones who certainly hasn't got it at all.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the 300 silver coins in the perfume and the 30 silver coins that Judas Iscariot decided to sell Jesus for.
You make an important point there, Ian, but stick to the text. Where'd you get the 30 coins from?
I thought it was 30 pieces of silver from memory.
Yes, that's from memory, but it's not from Mark's gospel.
No, but from another one.
Mark makes a stronger point than that, actually. This woman comes and pours out that perfume on Jesus. By contrast, a few verses later, Judas Iscariot agrees to betray Jesus. For what?
For personal gain.
No?
No? Okay.
He asks for nothing.
He asks for nothing. For nothing. It's a freebie. He's just wanting to do it. He is so disappointed with Jesus that he's just willing to sell him out. He asks for nothing. When they hear it, the chief priests, when they hear that he's willing to sell him out, they're very pleased and they say, oh, well, we'll give you something. We'll give you some money to make it, you know. But he's done it for no reason other than he is, well, what good reason could you give to make sense of betraying Jesus? There's nothing that can justify it, really, is there? And it's worse than that in Mark's gospel, certainly, because look at verse 10, if you've got it open in front of you. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12. Don't get the impression that he was one of the enemy. He wasn't one of the high priests. He wasn't one of the Romans. He wasn't just one of the Jews. He was one of the 12. He was part of this inner circle. He was one of those who had traveled alongside Jesus for 3 years. They'd eaten together. They'd rested together. For 3 years he was in that inner circle. That's the horror of betrayal. That's the absolute horror of it. In contrast to this woman who recognizes what Jesus is going through and going to go through and anoints him and pours out what she has to offer him and to prepare him. And she's done, verse 8, she has done whatever she could. Can you see the contrast that's been painted between the two? I mean, Judas had everything going for him in terms of becoming a disciple. Gosh, he was discipled by the best, 3 years with the Son of God, you know, he should be all right.
It's noticeable that Mark doesn't give any justification. He didn't give any reason why Judas does this. He just simply says he betrayed him.
As if, Jim, as if to say, I imagine when I read it like that, I imagine that Mark is saying, there's no way you could justify it. You know, if he was disappointed in Jesus, would that have justified it? If he was angry with Jesus, would that have justified it? Would 30 of coins have made up for it? No, it's just, there's nothing to say. He was one of the 12 and he betrayed him. Yeah.
May I speak?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just jump in.
I think
Yes.
what's striking to me is the wording, in that, going back to the woman, she had done what lay in her power, as equally Judas had done what laid within his power. And that actually is a power that lays within us today, doesn't it? To either betray our Lord or to step forward and do all we can for him. The parallel.
Right, Debs. And so, I mean, it's so starkly put in. Truth is, I think that most of us are somewhere in between. And that's the reality that we've watched through the other 13 chapters, that actually we're more like these bumbling disciples who kind of don't get Jesus, kind of fascinated by him, want to follow at a distance, don't want to follow, want to correct him, want to make sure that he does things the right way, all that sort of stuff. But here it's stark, isn't it? It's either, are you a disciple like the woman, or are you a Judas? Time to choose. Never quite that simple, is it? But it's very real, yeah.
But there's a third group of people here, aren't there? Because actually, Mark makes the point in verses 4 and 5. There are we don't know where Judas stood on this, but there are several people there who aren't happy about what the woman does.
Mm.
There were some there, and they scolded her. So, you know, there's actually, it's more than in this story. There's, yes, Judas may be the, you know, be the end point of it, but there's other people along the way as well.
Yeah. And so, I mean, these other people and Judas are sort of making this point that this is very wasteful. You know, what could we have done with the money? We could have done this, we could have done that. And then verse 7, Jesus says, for you will always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. And that is probably one of the most easily misunderstood and misquoted pieces of scripture and misused, abused pieces of scripture in Mark's gospel. Because the one thing that it doesn't say is that don't worry about the poor. They're always going to be poor. The problem of poverty is unavoidable and there's nothing you can do about it. Actually, Jesus says, he kind of says to them, how can I explain? If I was to say to you, an apple a day, you'd all say to me, keeps the doctor away, wouldn't you? A stitch in time saves 9. Okay. In that kind of way, when Jesus says to them, for the poor you will always have with you, the good Jews would have said, Deuteronomy 15, verse 7, therefore I command you, live with an open hand towards your brother, to the needy and the poor in the land. That's the second half of those first 6 words. So the one thing it doesn't mean is don't worry about the poor, just give some money to the church or something like that. Absolutely not what Jesus is saying. But he is saying something about this being a pivotal moment. And here is this woman who in this whole story of people trying to follow, trying to understand, here is someone who really understands what it means for him to be Son of Man and to move towards his death. Yeah.
Judas must have been very thinking about and getting frustrated with Jesus because he wasn't being the person that he wanted him to be. And so he, you know, this last statement of Jesus about turning the world a different way up would have just been the last straw for Judas. He's just that in.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
I think it's quite a scary situation, really, because Judas could just left things well alone, let what was going to happen, and he goes and does this, which leaves him as the devil almost in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't need to do it.
But if he wants a different kind of Messiah, if he wants a Messiah that's getting rid of the Romans and giving his disciples power, then obviously Judas wants to force that issue because he wants to be on the leadership side. He thinks that, you know, forcing that, he's going to get rid of all these silly ideas about caring for the poor, and
Yeah.
Jesus keeps on getting involved with the lowest of the low when he should be getting involved with the rulers.
Do you think, Margaret, that Judas expected Jesus to change direction as a result of the betrayal, that the chief priests and scribes would take action against him, and then Jesus would come out on the white horse and lead the all-conquering Messiah bit?
It's possible that, I mean, that was a very prevalent view at the time, that the Messiah would sweep away the Romans and restore Israel to a high position and a world leader.
And but not this Messiah.
No,
Jesus rejected that image of Messiah.
Yeah, I mean, but he probably, having got that firmly in his head, that he wants a Messiah on the white horse, a conqueror, a king, that all that Jesus is doing is really rubbing him up the wrong way and really getting under his skin, and it's getting more and more of an irritant.
Yeah.
And so he finally says, you know, I've got to push him into this. I've had enough.
Let's go on. Let's read further. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. And wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, 'Where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And we'll show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there.' So the disciples set out and went to the city and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. And when it was evening, he came with the 12. And when they had taken their places and they were eating, Jesus said, 'Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me.' And they began to be distressed and say to him one after another, 'Surely not I.' He said to them, 'It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born.' While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to them and said, 'Take, this is my body.' Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. And he said to them, 'This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly, I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God.' And when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Familiar imagery. What's unusual, what's strange?
The disciples didn't know which of them might be doing the deed. Jesus had
interesting.
Jesus had made no differentiation between any of them, but he obviously knew. but he had yet he loved them all, treated them all exactly the same.
I don't know. I'm not sure that he obviously knew, but it's really interesting that the 12 are all together here through this whole passage. The 12 are there, they eat together, they share meals, there's fellowship between them, as there probably has been all through this thing. And then they join in a very Jewish meal with very Jewish symbolism in it about, I mean, the unleavened bread was a symbol of the misery they'd endured, the bitter herbs represented slavery, the fruit puree resembled the clay that they'd used in their forced labor, the Passover lamb is remembering God's passing over Israel, and all of that symbolism is kind of there in the meal. And then Jesus sort of boldly reinterprets it in terms of himself, in terms of what's happening there and then. The bread that sustained the hungry masses on the way now becomes Jesus' body. The blood is a story of a new covenant that's happening in their midst. And all of a sudden we're thinking, is this a Passover meal? Passover feast? There's no lamb. Instead, Jesus is talking about taking this ritual meal to talk about the human one giving his life to his people.
Before we get to that,
okay, yeah,
there's a man carrying a jar of water, doing some work. That would surely stand out. Why?
Why? Yeah, it's his woman's work, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It would stand out, not so much, but enough that you'd know it was unusual if you happen to notice it. And Paul?
I was going to say, I think perhaps he's a bit like, the donkey that was tied up ready and waiting. It sounds, doesn't it, as though this guy is there he's hanging around looking for them, and they've been told to look for a fellow that looks like this. It has that same sort of flavour to it, I think, doesn't it?
I think it does. I think it's got this idea of a prearranged thing. It's not just randomly going to the town. You're going to find someone there carrying, I think it's just something that has been prearranged, that there's someone who will meet you and he'll show you where it is that we're going to have the Passover, because we can't meet openly because the authorities are looking for me. And it has that feel of a prearranged thing. So as a prearranged symbol, the idea of this man carrying the water jar would be something that that would stand out. But at the same time, if you weren't looking for a symbol, you might sort of notice it and wonder, why is he doing that? But it wouldn't worry you in the least. So I think that's what it's about, quite possibly. Yeah. Yeah, it's like a thriller, trying to avoid it as a spy is undercover, hiding from the powers that be. What else?
Well, the disciples prepared the Passover meal, and whether lamb was included in that, I don't know, but it would have been the disciples who did it and prepared the meal.
Yeah, the disciples prepared it, that's right, yeah. So I mean, it doesn't explicitly say that there's a Passover lamb there, and you might wonder, well, would they have been able to organize one or something like that? It's kind of odd, but there's it certainly does bring that to mind. And so there's this blending of these two stories, of these two accounts. Is it a Passover meal? Isn't it a Passover meal? And so, as a Jew, you'd have all that Passover symbol all those Passover symbols in your mind. Here we are, as the people, remembering how God set us free, looking back in our history at our struggle for liberation, and remembering how God has rescued us in the past. That's what the Passover is all about. And somehow mixed in with all of that is Jesus's new imageries or reinterpretations, where he says, no, this bread is my body, this blood is this new covenant. And he's telling this story that actually this working and journeying for liberation is not just about looking back. It's not just about celebrating something that God has done in the past, but it's perhaps something that we're called to in the present. that we're called to rethink, that we're called to refollow. And it's not just a memorial, but actually it's something that's very real and very present and very alive in the world here and now, that asks of us how we behave, how we choose, what we want. And somewhere between those two, a foretaste of the kingdom of God prepared for all people. Yeah.
I've just
In
looked.
the verses, it says that truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. But then earlier in verse 10, it says Judas went to the priests as though he had already betrayed him.
Yeah, so verse, give me the verses again.
10 says,
10.
Garrett, one of the 12, went to the chief priests. And then later in verse 18, it says, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me.
So I think that's just a different understanding of the word. So actually verse 11, it also says, so Judas began to look for an opportunity to betray him. So I think verse 10, he kind of signs the deal, if you want. And then he needs to find a moment where, there are no crowds, it's quiet, whatever, where you can say to them, well, meet us here, and you'll be able to arrest Jesus without the crowds being there. We're going to be there now. I think that's the shift that's happening. Does that make sense?
In order to betray Jesus, Judas would have had to walk from Bethany to Jerusalem to see the high priests and speak to them, and then obviously go back to Bethany. Another 2 miles.
Yeah.
I think something which perhaps is significant, isn't it, that in verse 10, as we pointed out, it mentions Judas being one of the 12, and then in verse 17, it says he came with the 12.
Right.
So
Judas is still in that.
Judas is there.
Group.
Judas
is there.
Yeah, and Judas hears Jesus saying, one of you is going to betray me. And, there is the thought, isn't there, that here is an opportunity for Judas to change his mind. Here is an opportunity for Judas to say, actually, I'm not going to do this. To say, actually, look, Jesus, I've done something really bad, and they're going to come and get you if you're not careful, but don't. But he doesn't.
Yeah.
He has an opportunity for repentance that he doesn't take.
And that's some of the sort of absolute horror of that word betray. We've come so easily to Judas betray. We hear Judas, we know what he's like. We hear this word betray in the context, whatever. But betrayal is about your absolute closest insider friend turning against you and putting a knife in your back, sort of thing. It doesn't get any worse than that. Yeah. In terms of a breakdown of relationship and trust.
Judas goes to great lengths to lay the trap, to prepare that way, so that Jesus is arrested. Jesus, by contrast, has gone to great lengths to prepare for the Passover, to get all the arrangements in place. The disciples don't know anything about that either. And I suddenly thought about us as disciples, as followers. So many times we have no idea what is around the corner, what is happening next. But just in the way that Jesus has prepared with a householder to have the upper room and have a secret sign to find it and everything else that. So he also prepares the way elaborately and holds everything together for us to arrive in his presence in the room.
It's obvious that lots of these things had been prepared in advance by Jesus, and perhaps Judas did it because Jesus had asked him to, because he was the only one he could trust, because he'd already discovered just a few chapters back that Peter and James and John had picked up the wrong end of the stick. Jesus needed to make this happen, and he knew Judas was sufficiently steadfast to do it. Judas was the type that would do something he didn't want to do because the master had told him to do it.
So Judas, you're suggesting Judas betrayed Jesus on Jesus' command.
Possibility.
That wouldn't be betrayal then, would it? I mean, the stories always make it very much a story of betrayal, whereas actually that would make him just a good and faithful servant.
It will be perceived as betrayal by the gospel writers.
No, the church has rejected it. I mean, there was a story of the gospel of Judas you might have heard. I mean, there was a lot said about it. It comes around in cycles, but there was a lot said about it about 10 years ago. In a sense, rejecting the idea that this is, that in some ways, Judas is the good guy in the story, because actually if Judas betrays Jesus and goes to hell because of it, well, actually, who's laid down their life for the life of the world? Actually, it's Judas. And we should be following Judas. And that's really not the account at all. Rather, Judas has an option, and all through this has the option to be faithful, just like all of us do. And for whatever reason, and the reason is not important, he rejects what is good and light and sides with what is dark and evil. And that's the story as we have it. Yeah. If there's no, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there's no suggestion at all that Judas is anything other than a betrayer who, for various reasons, might have sold Jesus out. Yeah.
Judas is quite an enigma, isn't he? Because all this carry on about travel to Jerusalem to see the chief priests, and then to go through all this, and as soon as Jesus goes to trial, he goes and kills himself, and it just seems amazingly silly, really. A regret, I suppose. But the regret should have come earlier.
And I think that this is the really sad thing with Judas, isn't it? Because it doesn't actually, there's not much about his death in Mark, but in the other ones where there is that his response to what he's done is to kill himself. Now, Peter betrays Jesus, but Peter repents in a different way. And this is the tragedy of Judas. He does what we may do, but actually we respond in the wrong way.
Clearly, Judas has every opportunity to change his mind, to change around what he's going to do. And yet he's got it in his head that he hasn't, that's his only direction. Judas has got it in his head, and he's going to plow on with that. And then finally he kind of comes up sharp, because he suddenly realizes the gravity, that it's not gone the direction he wants. He's not got a king on a white horse.
So let me come in there, Margaret. So I've been telling you for 10 weeks, 11 weeks, is it? 1, stick to the text. Everything you need to know is in the text. You don't need to speculate. You don't need to go and read Mark's gospel, John's gospel, to understand Mark's gospel or anything like that. Everything you need to know is in the text. Okay. So particularly with these familiar passages around this time of this Easter time of the year, try and stick with what Mark is saying and understand the story as Mark has presented it to us. But equally important, maybe even more important, is remember that this is gospel writing. So actually, you know what? a debate around Judas and why he did it, when he did it, whether he was a good guy, whether he was really badly misunderstood, or what Peter was actually like, is completely irrelevant. This is about you. This is your story of discipleship. And somewhere in this story of discipleship, of Judas, of Peter, of the other disciples, of Jesus, we need to be thinking, is that me? Do I do that? Am I like that? Have I made choices like that? Because if you go back with me to, I think it's about verse 19. Yeah, verse 19. So verse 18, and when they'd taken their places and they were eating, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. Verse 19, they began to be distressed and to say to him one after another, gosh, not me, Jesus. Now, if you had an entirely clear conscience, you wouldn't be saying that. You'd say, I know it's not me. Of course it's not me. I wouldn't even have to ask. I wouldn't have to worry about it. I wouldn't be distressed. But actually, I'm not that good a disciple some of the time. And so they're wondering there, gosh, is he talking about me? And sometimes it wouldn't do us any harm to look at Judas and say, gosh, are there parts of me that sell Jesus out for no good reason?
Well, we've all got more than enough opportunities to say, there, but for the grace of God go I.
We all have plenty of opportunities to say, what will you give me to betray him? And we probably do. They're not in so many words.
Can I just go back to the text?
Yeah, please, let's go back to the text.
Verse 23. Then he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them. All of them drank from it. He hasn't yet told them what's in the cup. He then announces that the cup represents his blood. Now, if I'm a Jew who's avoided consuming blood all my life, I don't think I would have drank it if he told us beforehand.
Yeah, of course, it's not blood in the cup. Okay, it's symbolism. And so he's saying, you've always understood that we pass this cup around. It means one thing. It means that we're all sharing in this blessing. It's a part of this Jewish meal that we've always had, and it's got a specific symbolism with that in terms of covenant and forgiveness of sins. And then he reinterprets that symbol and says, this is my blood, not just the blood of an offering that was done in terms of forgiveness. And so it's a complete reinterpretation of their theology of forgiveness, if you like. Can we go on? Can we go on? So when they sung a hymn, when they'd sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, you will all become deserters, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, even though all become deserters, I will not. And Jesus said to him, truly I tell you this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I'm deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And then going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. And he came and he found them sleeping. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. And they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus said to him, have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. Close to the text. What do you see? What do you hear? What's strange? What's unusual?
Well, Judas must have disappeared for a while from the 12, knowing where Jesus was going. He obviously wasn't with them on the Mount of Olives. If that's important, I don't know.
Yeah. He must have known where they were going, or they must have had a usual place that they went to, or something like that, that he was able to say, or he might have just asked them where we're going, and he said, okay, I'll meet up with you later. Yeah, something like that. He knew where they were going to be. Do you pick up in the way Mark tells the story that this is not easy for Jesus? That he's not thoroughly comfortable with the idea that the Romans are going to torture him to death the next day. That actually he is absolutely wrestling with this, and as anyone would. And as he wrestles with it, he goes to that place, possibly, it's not in the text, I'll explain why I think it's a fair assumption, of wanting to sort of bail out of it. There's a part of the demons within, if you like, that language of saying, surely there must be another way. And just like that, when they came down from the transfiguration, and he says to the disciples, saying, why couldn't we drive out those demons? And he says, they can only be driven out by prayer. And what is Jesus doing this time? He wrestles with this whole thing in prayer. They pray with me, pray with me. The disciples are in a completely different place. They're kind of like, they're asleep. They're asleep. They're not staying awake. They're not able to really comprehend what is going on.
I think for me, the significant thing is that though Jesus was in this dreadful, deep distress, he says, nevertheless, not what I want, but what you want. That he's prepared to submit himself to the will of his Father, no matter how hard it is for him.
I mean, Jesus was a human being after all. And he did say that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He reacted the same as we would probably if we had that in front of us.
So sorry, is there something else? Jeff, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, he needs the companionship of his disciples. Can you watch with me for an hour and fall asleep? Can you not watch?
got the impression that all the hard work was done in the prayer, that after the arrest, Jesus knew exactly where he was going and walked in obedience. And all of the
Yeah, he's more intentional after the prayer, isn't he? Come, let's go do this thing. Well, I've still got, yeah, I see that. Do you notice that? I mean, we're still talking about betrayal and intimacy, and Judas, verse 43, Judas, who was one of the 12, even at this stage, Judas, who was one of the 12, and he comes up to Jesus and he kisses him. I mean, this is a intimate, close act of one friend to another, and that's the symbol you choose to do him in. You don't just stand at the gate and point out the guy on the right. You go up to Jesus and give him a kiss. That will be the symbol that this is the person you need to kill. So, yeah, Paul?
I was going to say, and in a sense, you know, does he need to give the symbol as to, does he really need to tell these people by kissing Jesus? You know, as you say, not even by pointing him out, because Jesus had been showing himself around the town, they would have known him anyhow. There is something horribly deliberate about it, isn't there?
So go on.
Well, I mean,
yeah, go on. I mean, there's something horribly deliberate about it. So why has Mark made a point of telling us this is how it happened in this horribly deliberate way?
Because it's about, you know, I mean, as with Peter being all our stories, so Judas is all our stories in ways and in means, aren't they?
Exactly.
We all do this we all do this sort of stuff.
It would have
sadly, yes. so again, the question to be asking yourself as we read through these verses is where am I? Where am I in the story? Where am I in the story? And verse 50, all of them deserted him and fled. Okay? How alone is Jesus in this place? All of them deserted him and fled. There was a certain young man who was following him. No name, we don't know anything about him except for what? They caught hold of him, he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. Verse 51, 52. What do we know about this man? Gospel writing.
We think he's...
We know everything we need to know about him.
We think he is...
We don't know that. We don't know that. I don't think he's Mark. He's someone else. Told us in verse 51 and 52 everything we need to know about him. So what does it say to us there?
Does it represent us?
It represents, yeah, it represents us. Or more specifically, it represents those that were following him. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, he left the linen cloth behind and ran off naked. Naked? Oh, for Jews, that's the ultimate shame.
Bad thing.
Ultimate shame. He ran away from Jesus, and that is his shame. When Jesus was needing someone to support him, he was headed in the other direction. And there's just a little link in that story because he leaves behind a linen cloth. And in a little while, we're going to find another linen cloth in the story. And that's what they wrap Jesus' body in. There's no indication it's the same linen cloth, but it's the same thing. Him running away results in Jesus' death. Yeah? There's a link, at least.
It does remind me of, you know, being naked, being exposed, being vulnerable, and all those things back to Genesis chapter 3. And that realizing that you have been found out, you have been, you know, God sees it all and knows it all. Yeah.
Adrian?
Yes.
I'd just like to point out and see if I'm taking things too far. But in verse 21, just before the Lord's Supper, Mark refers to Jesus twice in the same verse as Son of Man.
Right.
And at the end of this, after we've been through the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, we've got this man running off naked. And Adam was naked. Is there a very strong statement at the beginning and end of this that everything in this section is about the state of a human being, including the prayer in the garden? Because so often when we're faced with something to do for God, we want to get out of it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's wonderful preachable stuff in amongst what you've said, Peter. The Son of Man conversation. Son of Man is the fullness of what it means to be a human being. This
Exactly.
is the perfect person.
Yeah.
The nakedness of this young man at the end of the story is that's the shamefulness of who we are,
Yeah.
in a
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
because it was when Adam sinned that he and Eve realized their nakedness.
Right. So I mean, all of that, but I would think that the link to Adam is, for me, spurious, except that it's this idea of shame and nakedness going together. So I think it's just another example of shame and nakedness going together. Yeah. Can I share screen quickly? So they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, they were all again in plural, the elders and the scribes were assembled. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony. So let me read that slowly. The chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, I will destroy the temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another not made with hands." But even on this point, their testimony didn't agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer. And again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" And all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him. And while Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, that man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you're talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And then after a little while, the bystander again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man you are talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. And Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. And I just want to highlight just 1 or 2 things for you in that text as we look through it. Notice here that they're looking, the chief priests, you're still looking at the text, I know you can't see me. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus, a reason to put him to death. There's no semblance of a fair trial, okay? They're looking for an excuse to sort out their problem, and they found nothing. They'd set up false testimony, they found nothing, okay? Then they asked Jesus, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus says in verse 62, he says, in some translations, I am. Now, if he was to say I am, that is like the name of God in a sense. It relates to Yahweh's name of I am who I am. Okay, and it's not entirely clear in the Greek if that is what is said, because it could equally be that Jesus said, am I? In the sense that, so those are your words, not my words. Am I that? Or am I the Son of Man that you will see seated at the right hand of power? Either way, the high priest tears his clothes. He says he has what he wants. Then Peter's in the court below, and this person who's got no power at all, the servant girl who has no power, she's just a servant of the high priest, she comes and she says to him, I know who you are. He denies it, number one. And the cock crows once. And then the servant girl sees him again, same person. And again, this is one of them. And again, he denies it twice. Then after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you're a Galilean. They're onto something now. They recognize his accent. Okay. Peter began to curse, and he swore an oath. I mean, these are strong actions. And then worst of all, it's almost that he tells the truth. I do not know this man. And that's almost the summary of Peter's discipleship in the story so far. I do not know this man. And the cock crows for the second time. And Peter remembers, and he breaks down and he weeps. Anything you want to add? Anything I've missed, or any insight that you have?
The illegalities of what's going on just keep on mounting up, because the high priest was forbidden under Levitical law to tear his clothes, because that was a sign of mourning, and it's expressly forbidden to do that. It's also expressly forbidden to ask somebody who's on trial for their life a direct question that under oath that they have to answer, because he's asking under oath somebody to which they would have if they're asked under oath by the priest, and they have to answer.
So I wouldn't know all the technicalities of the law, but there's no doubt that there are parts of the trial that are illegal, that this is a stitch up. I mean, this is gosh, I don't know who you want to pick on. This is what the apartheid government did to people who fought against the apartheid government, and you can stick in, basically any groups you want. This is how power treats threats. And the law is there to keep ordinary people in mind, and the law is what we put aside when we want to say we've got a higher cause. So yes, it was an illegal trial, and it was to do with how they had made up their mind what was the right thing to do, and they weren't going to be swayed by what is good or what is just or what is fair, because they'd made up their mind this is what the course of action was going to be.
Yeah, verse 62 is what makes the priest probably very angry. And he says, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Almighty and coming with clouds. He's almost telling them that you will see me one day like that. Do you read it that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
nothing that was not built on justice would last. And here we see a trial to put Jesus to death, which is unjust. And we know the story, it doesn't last. Death does not last.
Right, right, yeah, because God is just. Because that's who God is, because that's woven into the fabric of the whole of creation. Yeah. What my last thought for tonight, as you read the story and as you really struggle to come to terms with it, and as we journey with it year after year, the way Mark tells us the story is really undermined if you think that Jesus is a prescient, godlike character who just knows how the story ends. Actually, he's a man who in Gethsemane is, can I say, I don't want to say fighting for his life. He's wrestling with his mortality. He's wrestling with his life coming to an end. And there's no sacrifice in me giving you something if you promise you're going to give it back to me tomorrow. There's no sacrifice in Jesus laying down his life if he just knows, you know what, it's actually just a good rest for the weekend. I'm going to be fine on Sunday morning. This is the story about Jesus laying down his life, dying, being dead, drawing a line on it. Saturday morning, he is, Friday evening, he is no more. He was. And we really have to journey with that as a part of the Easter story as we struggle to work out what it means here and now for us to be disciples of Jesus.